Hey, this is Matt from the Woodworking Nook. Today, I'm going to be building a new top for my workbench. This is something that I have been needing to do for a while now. As you can see, the top is pretty beat up. And this is because I've been cutting directly into the workbench, obviously, and not using a spoiler board. So what I'm going to do is recut the same shape out, but in this case, I'm going to keep it all connected as one piece. Whereas before I had two separate pieces for each section. Right now I'm just cutting off the edge of each piece so that I have a nice clean edge on each side. This cut I did not fully think through. I had to get on top to finish that off. Now if you've seen my workbench before, it has two lengths to it. So right now I'm just going to cut halfway down and then cut the other length on the worktop. I enjoy having that additional space on the cutting side just so that I can cut larger pieces of plywood. Plus it gives me more space underneath. It also creates a corner gap in between each length so that I can clamp down a router jig or like a router table that I've made. Just gives it more clamping area on the workbench. And I chose to use MDF again, mainly because the Festool MFT table is made out of MDF, and this last table has worked fine for me. Plus it's on the cheaper side, so it makes for a good worktop. And yes, my workbench is made out of 2x4s. Those drawers on the side there are all sized differently. Because the workbench was so out of square, I needed to size them each individually so that they would fit properly in the space. It took a lot of time, but it has worked out great and saved me a bunch of money. As you can see, this section in the middle here actually dips down a little bit, so I'm going to add some shims to help level it out. I never really noticed it with the previous workbench, so I'm not too concerned about it now. And I'm just adding pocket screws underneath to help hold the workbench down. So now it's time to make all the holes in the workbench. What I'm going to do is use this hole boring jig from Woodpeckers. It's kind of an expensive jig compared to the other ones, but since I rely on this grid of holes so much, I needed each one to be perfectly square with one another. So in my mind, it was worth it to know that each hole was going to be perfectly square with one another. Plus, it gives me the freedom to add holes to any workbench that I may have. I drilled 1/2-inch holes before using the router, mainly to help get rid of a bunch of the worktop before making the holes. I have found in the past that it just takes a lot from the router to bore the hole and then make it bigger. So I was just kind of bypassing that step with the drill. After boring each hole, the next step was to use this reamer tool that I have. It has a chamfer on the end so that it chamfers each hole as well as make sure that the hole is perfectly sized. And I'm using the 20mm sized holes as opposed to the 3/4 inch, mainly because a lot of the products that I like come from Europe, so I want to be able to utilize those accessories with this workbench. The cool thing about this jig though is that it does come with an option to do 3/4 inch holes as well as the 20mm holes. That way it gives me the option if I ever were to want to add some 3/4 inch, I could do that as well. So you want to make sure that the jig is clamped down really well. I made the mistake of when I first got this jig, I didn't have those track saw clamps that could fit inside the hole yet. So I thought the indexing pins would hold it in the right position, but I was wrong. I started to make the holes a little bit bigger as I was moving the router around. So with each set of holes that you make, you want to make sure that it's clamped down super well. And this process is a little tedious, but you can get in the hang of things once you got your system down. I basically make the centering holes for drilling out the hole first, vacuum it up, reattach my shop vac hose, and then bore each hole. Then take the reamer tool to it, make sure that each hole is sized properly. And then you have your set of holes. And just repeat the process for the next one. I decided to add some extra holes towards the other side of the workbench so that I could support some really longer pieces on my workbench when I needed to. Again, having this jig allows you to have that creativity and add the holes where you would like to have the holes. After all the holes were done, I added a chamfer to the edge of the workbench and then began to prepare for finishing the underside first of the workbench. In the past, I haven't finished the tops of my workbenches, but this time I decided to do so. And as you can see, the bottom was kind of beat up, so I decided to add that chamfer to each of the holes on the bottom so that it would make it easier to apply the finish. In this finish, I'm just using the furniture oil that I have. I did some research online on the best finish for a workbench and obviously came up with a whole bunch of different answers. So I just decided to use what I had and figured that would make do. I'm curious if anyone else has a strong opinion on what you should finish your workbench with. If you do, leave it down in the comments below. After the bottom was dry enough, I flipped it over and did the top. With this being MDF, it really soaked up a lot of finish. So make sure to apply a few coats of finish when you do so. One thing that I'm going to add to my workbench is this 3D printed track saw hinge. I found one online and decided to have my brother print it out so that I could test it out and see how it works in my setup. Obviously, I would prefer to have one of the manufactured metal ones, but this will do for now just to kind of test it out. I'll make a video on it after I've used it for a while, letting you know how well it worked for me. So make sure you're subscribed to see that video. I decided to fill in the gap below with my old worktop so that I could clamp something to those holes if I need to. But this time I'm using a spoiler board so that I don't cut into my workbench this time. I've stored them in the back there where there's some space, so I'll be able to use those when needed. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.